Reminder that our series for the year has been sponsored Leilu Nishmas Avram Ben Yona Yaakov, and is also in memory of Yigal, who was the hostage that Almog Ben Yigal, who was the hostage that was killed. Chapter 3 and laughter, page 29. Let us look more closely at the transition from ordeal to deliverance. A most illuminating way to approach this subject is to understand the deeper meaning of laughter. For the mystical concept is that the response to deliverance from imminent disaster is the root of laughter. Now, that needs a little bit of explanation, okay? Essentially, what we're doing is that last step, as you remember, we had step number 1 is the beginning, is the flash, is the inspiration, is the excitement. After that, then there's the hard work, which we're calling at the moment, is calling the ordeal. So step number 2. And then step number 3, which is having arrived at the destination, the achievement, sense of achievement, that is what he's calling the deliverance. So this transition from step number 2 to step number 3 is what we're looking at. And in order to examine that, we're going to use laughter. Because the idea of laughter in a mystical sense, remember, everything on this world just masks a spiritual concept. And therefore, if there's the concept of laughter down here on this world, which is something which is a very important part of our lives, right? Nothing like making people smile. It's good. It's healthy. I think I wrote a Parsha article about how many, positive effects on the body it has when you have a smile, when a person smiles. By the way, something interesting as well, when a person smiles at you, then it's almost, without you realizing, you end up smiling back at them. Okay? That's just the way it works. Why? All of these things, because laughter is part of it's embedded into the human psyche, it's embedded into this world. And therefore, at its root, in a mystical sense, laughter is our response to deliverance, which is that final step. So the human reaction to step number 3, which is really kind of where we want to get to, really. We want to move over from the 1 to the 2 to step number 3, that deliverance, is laughter. That's what laughter is, essentially. So this is how we're going to examine laughter, the root of laughter. And then when you overanalyze something, it's not funny anymore, yeah? So, when you take a joke and you start asking questions about it, it's just not funny anymore. So it's not going to be that funny, this chapter, okay? But we are going to examine laughter. And then maybe Anthony will give us a joke at the end. He's always got a joke up his sleeves, right, Anthony? Okay, to understand this, we will have to note a basic premise. The physical world is constructed on a root dimension of deeper forces, okay? That physical world that we experience has a deeper dimension, its root. Everything in the world reflects its root in a higher level exactly. That is how we can have access to understanding the spiritual world. Although we have no sense organs to apprehend it directly, we can grasp the nature of the physical world and then translate its structure in every detail to an understanding of the spiritual world. In fact, the only path to the spiritual is through the medium of the physical. When someone tells a moshel, we tell an analogy, you very often find rabbis telling stories, right? The reason why we tell stories and we use mashalim, a parable, is because very often the concepts can only be understood if we use the terms which we're familiar with, or even the emotions which we're familiar with, as a vehicle to understanding it. And this is something that, Jewish people have been doing forever, so since time immemorial, literally. The Torah Shebaal Peh, the Medrash, our earliest form of written down Torah, about 2,000 years old, it tells stories and it has parables. And this is the reason why. Because the only way that a human being who is not spiritual is able to communicate and actually get a sense and a feel and an emotion for something which is transcendent, for something which is above this world, is when we use this world as a vehicle in order to understand it. By the way, the mystical subjects, Kabbalah, the mystical wisdom of Kabbalah is all a moshel, because you can't actually speak about God using the words and the frame of references that we have as human beings. So therefore, the study of Kabbalah is essentially just studying things which are a parable. That's always studying whether it's objects or items or concepts or emotions, and all of them are just a parable. And that's why, if it's not understood correctly, then it can be very, very problematic because a person can start to think that that parable, that mashal, is all there is, and start to sort of deify those things and think that, this is all there is to God, and God is something physical, etc. All of those things that we can't do. That's why it's got to be explained very, very carefully. It's got to be understood very, very carefully in a way that all of this is just a parable, is just a mashal for understanding something which is kind of almost beyond human comprehension. So similarly, everything that there exists in the physical world is really has its root in the spiritual world, and we need to use the physical world in order to understand the spiritual. And he says that's in fact the only path through which we can get to the spiritual, to really understanding the spiritual. He continues, perhaps the most potent illustration of this idea lies in understanding the manner in which we relate to another human being. When someone does or says something significant or meaningful, and you respond inwardly onto page 30, emotionally, what you are conscious of is the appreciation of that person's attitude or feeling towards you and its effect on your relationship, right? If someone says something nice, we feel good towards them. Someone says something hurtful towards us, then we feel bad towards them. By the way, that feeling often stays inside for longer than we would like. Important to note, whether that's a spouse or it's a colleague or it's a child or something, if there's been a difficult interaction, then the reality is it doesn't just go away after 5 minutes. That inner emotion, the way that we're feeling, sometimes there might be kind of a sharp reaction that follows something. You're like, oh, wow, where did that come from? How come why am I reacting in that way? I don't normally react. Or why are they reacting to me in that way? What did I say? What did I do? Where is it coming from? Because an hour ago or yesterday, there was a very difficult interaction. You're still feeling, or the other person is still feeling, something inside emotionally has changed, something they've been hurt emotionally. He continues, what you're not conscious of is that person's lips moving or muscles twitching, which in fact is exactly what is happening in the physical world. In other words, we automatically translate the vehicle of the physical into its deeper meaning. When someone says something to me, I'm not focused on their lips moving. I'm not focused necessarily even on the way that they turn their head or their body. What I'm focused on is the meaning of the words. What stays with me is the way that makes me feel. And therefore, what I've done really is I've taken something which is very physical and I've actually sort of translated it, almost ignored the physical and just taken the deeper meaning from it, which are the words. Now, sometimes a person will do something sort of so outlandish, while they're talking, or there'll be an action which is so crazy, so big, that I'll be forced to focus on the action. But in the main, I'm not focused on the action. I'm focused on the words and their effect on me. He continues, one can access another person's mind or personality only by means of the physical vehicle of their body, and yet that access is achieved effortlessly and naturally. Which means if you think about it, every time we communicate, which is why this is such a human thing to be able to do, which is to communicate in a meaningful way. When it says that Hashem created us and he blew into us a nefesh, vayipach ba'apov, nishmas chaim, he blew into us a soul, then Onkelos, the translation, most ancient translation of the Torah, says that was a ruach mamalala, which means a spirit that could speak. So the soul is associated with the power of speech, because essentially every time I communicate, what I'm doing is it's a window to my soul. Whereas when I look at the physical person, what I can see and I can touch and I can sense and I can feel is the physical part of the person. That's the guf, that's the body. When I speak to a person, or when a person speaks to me, we can communicate from the neshama. Now, remember, that's only meaningful communication, right? So I'm afraid to say, if it's, we're on autopilot and we're saying, we're saying something which doesn't come from the soul, then we're not speaking from the soul. And they're not going to actually be communicating with our neshama, right? At the moment in school, it's SEM application time. So most of the girls will go on to SEM. The Cosners are smiling, they know all about this. And they'll go on after school to SEM. And one of the things they want in SEM as do many sort of job applications now as well, is they want you to write something about yourself, which is a personal statement. And they want you, maybe this is unique to Sam, they want you to write about something, an event or something you've done in your life or an experience that you've had which has really moved you, which really has stayed with you and which has shaped you and formed you into the person that you are today. And very often the girls will bring me something which is amazing, like something wow happened, or an experience, or whatever it was, a Poland trip, or a person that they knew, or someone in their family, whatever it is. But I'll say to them, this is amazing, but I can't see you. You know what I mean? It could have been written by someone else. It's external. It's not, you're not expressing the way that it made you feel. What happened to you? What were the emotions that you went through? How did it change you as a person? Right? What was the before? What's the after, etc. That's real speech. That's real speech. That's what it means, that the neshama that Hashem blew into us is a ruach mamalala, is a speaking soul. And that, by the way, I feel, unfortunately, as our communication becomes more and more robotic, which means either we're used to talking to computers, quite literally, yeah, you go into a shop to order a coffee, and they say, stand by the screen. You're like, the guys there behind the counter. No. Order on the screen. Yeah. Order. You have to ask, is this sensible for human beings to be doing this, right? I don't know. It's not my decision, right? Why can't we talk to the person behind the counter? And I would say more than that, when we become used to communicating through AI, so in fact, it's not even me talking, but it's rather the AI which is writing my emails and communicating. Do we still remember the art of communicating who I am and using real communication when it's necessary? That's not to say we can't get AI to write the emails, that are unimportant, or the long document that has to be done just to satisfy and tick the boxes, etc. I get it. I understand. But we also need to be able to retain the art of real communication, because real communication is a window to the soul. He continues. The skill of spiritual living, of course, is to use that subtle and powerful switching mechanism always in relation to everything in the physical world, and to inwardly perceive the deeper level of meaning behind all the world's objects and phenomena. Which means, in the same way that when we're speaking to another person, in the same way that we can see the expression of their neshama, of their soul, and by the way, that's what stays with us more than anything else. Similarly, when we walk around the world, we can choose to see the world in two different ways. We can see the externalities. We can see no more than what looks nice and what dazzles and is glittery, and that's all. Or we can choose to see the inner meaning of what's going on over here. When I go to another city, what do I see within that city? Do I just see, wow, that was a lot of fun? Or do I see, wow, this is where this is coming from. This is the history. This is what I can learn from it. This is the deeper meaning behind. There's a certain culture here. What is going on in that culture? What can I learn from that culture? How is that culture different? What are the mindsets that these people have that I don't have? That's how a thinking person, the Bali Musa is the name given for the people who really champion the idea of working on one's character. Right, a movement started with Rabbi Yisrael Salanta in the 1700s in Vilna, and that movement still exists today, which means that there are people who are dedicated and they focus on the areas of Torah which are character development. One of my teachers, Rav Leuchter, was very, very much an expert at this. That was his, it was his expertise. And one of the things he always used to do was just notice the world. Very simply. He would very often speak about the things that had happened to him or the interactions that he'd had, but he would notice things which were deep, which were really, really deep about other people, about himself, insights into character. Where did that come from? It just came from training oneself to look at the world and see things on a deeper level than just the externals. And that's the idea. That's the idea he's talking about. The skill of spiritual living is to always be able to do that, be able to see deeper beyond the surface. He continues, so if we wish to grasp a spiritual idea, we must analyze its expression in the physical. So ultimately, we need to be able to do this, because when we do this properly, we can get to the understanding of the spiritual depth. What is the nature of laughter in the physical world? What exactly provokes the universal human response of laughter? Okay, so that was essentially an introduction and it's actually a good place to stop. Seeing that there is always something which is a deeper level and a spiritual dimension behind everything. And now the next part is what he's going to do is examine laughter, see what the nature of laughter is, kind of try to understand that. And then using that, we will be able to see our response or the transition from stage 2 to stage 3. We're going to stop there for this evening.